Okay, so now we're going to discuss decimals. So decimals always appear to the right of the decimal point. We can also have whole numbers with a decimal fraction as well. So I'll show you some examples here. So like we mentioned earlier, whole numbers always to the left of the decimal point. Decimals will follow, they'll be to the right of the decimal. So 3.125, for example. Now, when we start looking at decimals, I think it's very easy to change a decimal into a fraction if you first practice how to say the decimal correctly. So usually, like I just said earlier, we just say 3.125. But if we're reading this how it is supposed to be read, this would be 3 and 125 thousandths, okay? So looking at these places here, this would be our tenths place, hundredths place, and then the thousandths place. So that is how I got the 125 thousandths. That way, if I'm writing this in a fraction, well, I know I still have a whole number 3 here. And then I said this is 125 thousandths. So exactly as it sounds, 125 thousandths. Really quick way to just change a decimal into a fraction. Now, in this case, obviously we can reduce further. So we can still do that, but like I said, just a quick way to go from a decimal into a fraction here. And now going the other way, if we're looking at fractions into decimals, I know I mentioned earlier in the fraction lecture that any fraction, we read this usually as 2 over 5. We can look at this as a division problem. So 2 divided by 5. Okay, and once again, use your calculator. We're going to have access to that. So 2 divided by 5, if you type that into your calculator, that gives us 0.4. So just going from a fraction into a decimal. Now, let's use that rule I just showed you here to go back from a decimal into a fraction. Well, we're looking at the tenths place here. So this would be written as 4 tenths. Now, once again, we can reduce. We can divide each of these by 2, which would then give us 2 fifths. So all 3 of these numbers here, 2 fifths, 0.4, or 4 tenths, and then the fraction 4 tenths, they all have the same value. They're just interpreted differently. So keep that in mind. Decimals are always to the right of the decimal point. Whole numbers are always to the left of the decimal point. Now in your slides, converting fractions to decimals, that was what we just did there. So always divide your numerator by the denominator. So here's another example. 3 fourths, which is 3 over 4, same thing as 3 divided by 4. Type that into your calculator, you should get 0.75. Or if all we had was the decimal, 0.75, well, if we were to write this as a fraction using that rule I showed you here, this would be the tenths place, this would be the hundredths place. So we would have 75 hundredths. And then we could further reduce that down. So each of those can be divided by 25. Make sure you can see my screen here. There we go. And so 75 divided by 25 would give us 3. 100 divided by 25 would give us 4. So once again, that just confirms that 75 hundredths is the same thing as 3 fourths. Now, when we are comparing decimals, so seeing which number would be larger or smaller. We always want to look at the placeholder that is nearest the decimal point. So let's look at these three numbers here. So 0.125, 0.25, and 0.5. Now, if it helps you, you can always just write these in fractions to look at them that way, or just look at the first place value here that has a number. So in this case, all of these numbers have a digit in the 10th place. So 5 would be the largest, so this would have the largest value. Even though this number has 3 digits, keep in mind that this digit would be in the thousandths place, so it's going to have a smaller value. So the further the number goes out here, whatever digit we're looking at, that is going to be the smaller value. So in this case, 0.5 would be larger. Let's say that we threw in 1, 2, 5, 2. Now, looking at these two numbers, you can always follow up any of these numbers with zeros if that also helps you, compare each digit in the decimal. So since this one has a value, this would actually be the 10,000ths place here because we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So this would be a larger value here than 0.125. So always align your decimals first. It helps them to write them in order like I have here. Add your zeros if you need to, if that helps you see, each column to see which one is larger. And then if it helps you also, you can always just read them how we should be pronouncing them correctly. 125 thousandths, 25 hundredths, or 5 tenths, okay? Rounding decimals. This is going to be very important for basically all of your assignments throughout this quarter. Your book should give you directions on how they would like you to round. So hopefully you guys have heard of the rule, 5 or higher, we round up, less than 5, round down, okay? So we'll go through some examples here of what we mean by that. So let's look at 5.1275. Good example here. So let's say we want to round to the nearest tenth. So if we want to round to the tenths place, we look at the hundredths place. So remember the rule, 5 or higher, we would round up. Less than 5, round down, okay? So 2 is less than 5, so we would just round down to 5.1. We're just going to keep that at 5.1. Now, if I wanted to round to, let's say, the thousandths place. Remember, this is the tenths, this is the hundredths, this is the thousandths place. So if I'm rounding to the thousandths, I need to look to the right at the 10,000ths place. Now, 5 or higher says we round up. This is at a 5, so we need to round this 7 up to an 8. So if I'm rounding to the nearest thousandth, it would be 5.128, or 5 and 128 thousandths. Let's say we want to round to the nearest whole number. Well, my whole number, remember, is to the left of the decimal point. So I look to the right, I look at the tenths. This is less than 5, so I'm just going to round down, keep this at whole number 5. Go through a couple more examples here. Here we have 4.893. I want to round this to the nearest hundredth. Well, let's look at our decimals here. This is my tenths place, this is my hundredths place, so this is what I want to round to. So I look to the right here. This is less than 5, so I'm going to round down, keep this at 4.89. Now this next number here, 15.2563, and we want to round to the nearest tenth. Well, my tenths place is here, so I'm going to look to the right. 5 says that we round up, so 5 or higher, round up. So we're going to round this to a 3, so 15.3. Now, your book once again goes into great detail on how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals without a calculator. I'm not going to get into these because we have the capability of using a calculator in class and in the pharmacy. So if you have any questions on how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide decimals with a calculator, please see me and we can go through that together.